tomato is red, it's not only the natural red, it's a color of blood. We use ketchup and we use spaghetti, but we don't know it's from the people who work as slaves in the tomato fields. They force people to work and sell the cheap products around the world. People should know that when we are having these products, we are consuming the blood of my people.
Could we be eating tomato puree made with forced labor? The BBC has had dozens of supermarket tomato products tested in the lab. The results suggest that we could be.
These Chinese tomatoes were everywhere.
Tracing the route they take to get into our shops. Hearing from those forced to work the fields of China. Going undercover in a factory in Italy.
We'll find a way to produce the best price possible, even using Chinese tomatoes.
And exposing the risks of forced labor.
If there's any supermarket now claiming they didn't know, that is an absolute farce. They should know, and they did know.
This is the inside story of how supermarkets ended up with blood on the shelves. Xinjiang is a vast region in northwest China, with the Gobi Desert to the east and Tibetan mountains to the south. It has an ideal climate for growing tomatoes.
Xinjiang was a good place. Beautiful and very friendly. I couldn't forget that scenery, that people were working there, and like it's endless field, like, and then the trucks lining up, and then I realized, oh, so many tomatoes there, and so many tomatoes, so big tomato fields.
The tomato industry in Xinjiang is absolutely huge. It's so big that you can see it from space. We've got satellite imagery showing all of the tomatoes laid out to dry. We've seen a lot of footage from Xinjiang of the tomato industry, of these beautiful fields full of ripe red tomatoes, and it's spectacular. And yet there's a dark side to this industry.
Bir dehqon oilasida dunyoga keldim. Biz 3 qarindosh, men bolaning cho'ngi. Dadam bilan onammi bizga qarindoshlar birisi-birsini ayt yaxshi ko'ringlar, birisi-birsini so'yinglar. Hargizmi birisi-birisidan uzoq yashimanglar deydi.
Uyg'ur tili adabiyot bo'limida o'qidim. Ben şu o'qituvchi, ben de o çağda təxminən 5000 başda kitap batdı. Şu məktəbninki siyasi rəhbərləri bilib gəlib yana saçlar tutub əktib şu 20 keçildi. Xalqa vaxtda da ufladı, qip yanlaşlam əktib, urub. Bir 15 gün qattiq ig'ri so'roq qildi. 2015-yili yana tutilib, Yakan'niki turmaga kelib ketdi. Chunki men soqchixonaga isbotni berishim kerak ekan, ammo men uni qilmabdiman. u yerda men bir 40 necha kun u yerda shug'ultadim majburiy. Sabah soat 4da o'rnidan turamiz. Bizni mashinaga ilib, cho'l yeb ekan. Men birinchi qitimliqda 450 kilodan tiysen dedi. 450 kilo tiyemsen cezalayımız bügensen agalanır dedi. Ertesi 450 kilo yan tiyemeli. Benim bir bir kat uğdu. Karanlığı bir türümününki içinde Torusqa isalık bir tömüylür varken aşının astı sen nereden tiyip bulamazsan. Birinci günü təxminən 2 saatda tayaq yedim. Kasamı qatıq oldu və ənərkən taqım oldu. Kasamla yer qoyamay, uxlayamay, yaman qızlandım. Izi var. Tayaq yegəndikən, tayaqdan qo'rqib ketgəndikən mən zaten qatıq rəvay qılğan bulab ketdim. 450 kilodan gündən günə aşırdı, axırı 600 kilo, 650 kilo qədər çıxardı ular.
من الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين.
Mahmut Jan is one of 14 people who've told us they've endured or witnessed forced labor in Xinjiang's tomato industry over the last 16 years.
Allahu Ekber. Esselamu Aleyküm.
Some allege torture, even electrocution. It's hard to verify their accounts, but they are consistent. China denies they force people to work in the tomato industry. It says it's highly mechanized, and in 2019, proudly showcased it to the world in this report.
Every year in autumn, red dried tomatoes stretches away endlessly, forming a spectacular scenery. One thing worth noting about Xinjiang's tomatoes is that they're less juicy and easier to store and transport. That makes them more suitable for ketchups. So next time you squeeze that little packet of ketchup onto your greasy French fries, think of Xinjiang, as there's a high probability that the tomato in that ketchup comes from the largest region in China.
The Chinese state TV answer directly to the Chinese government, and therefore narratives that they portray are always going to be vetted.
Renako Selina is an investigative journalist specializing in China.
事件今天4点吧，你4点有时间吗？我们可以在楼下见面。I lived in China for about 7 years. There was never an open discussion about those allegations. The main things I would hear about Xinjiang were more positive about the region's history, about its agriculture.
China now grows about a third of the world's tomatoes, and the vast majority in Xinjiang.
There's this real incongruity between these dramatic shots of the tomato harvest and the campaign of oppression that people have gone through in Xinjiang, which is helping to produce that fruit.
A former architect, Alison Killing is a journalist specializing in open source intelligence and satellite imagery. She's working with the BBC to investigate Xinjiang's tomato industry.
So there's a few regions across Xinjiang where the tomato industry is really concentrated. One of those is the Yanqi Basin around Korla, and then there's a big area across northern Xinjiang that stretches from Urumqi, which is the capital, all the way to the west towards the Kazakh border. There was a big center for export by train that was built in Urumqi. And looking at that on satellite imagery, you can see like all of the containers in the goods yards. the railway lines and the freight yards where the tomatoes are stacked ready for export. It's always transported in these bright blue barrels, which are then loaded onto trains.
Most of Xinjiang's tomatoes are exported as paste, packed into these blue barrels. We're investigating the route they take. Is it ending up in our supermarkets? And was it made with forced labour? Xinjiang is home to 26 million people. About half are Muslim Uyghurs and Kazakhs.
It's a great civilization. The language they speak, the cultural practices, the vibrant lifestyle that people enjoy. But that's not how we talk about the Uyghur region. It became synonymous in human rights violations.
Xinjiang's Uyghurs have had a difficult relationship with Beijing for decades.
A riot erupts. Protesters, mostly from the Muslim Uyghur minority, tore apart buses and cars with their bare hands. Xinjiang's Uyghurs say they've been colonized by the Chinese.
Riots and attacks by Uyghurs protesting repression by the Chinese state led to civilians being caught up in violence and increasing crackdowns on what China called religious and political extremism.
Beijing says terrorists must be chased down like rats in the street.
Anyone publicly practicing Uyghur culture or religion could be picked up. Some, arrested and jailed, were forced to work in the tomato fields.
Açılışdan aldı ben tuş keraklik. Saqchilar kelib bizni tutib olib, chunki biz ko'z oldilarimizda unda adam tutayotgan ishlar jiq bo'lgan. Har vaqt har joyda tutilishimiz mumkin degan bir narsa kallamizda bor. Kishi xotirmaga qo'yib kelib opadik, beshimizga qor xaltini kiygizib 3 yil kesildim. Diniy tarbiyada Qur'on o'rgatdi deb. 2008'da sho'xlizdik. Biz shu yardım başlık o'tmay etizlik barimiz, yardım başlık o'tmay nimaga yenib kelamiz. Keyini yan taraflarimizda shu turmining saqchilari birga mangdi. Bir adamning 46 sho'xlinib yig'ish vazifasi bor. Eg'ir ish qilsa yiqilib tushadigan, aylanib ketadigan. 3 qatim aylanib ketdim, burnim qanadi, yiqilib tushgan ishlarim bo'lag'liq. Hatto jon uzadigan chattiq yo'q unda ishlar bilan.
Forced labour is being compelled to work under threat of punishment. But gathering evidence in Xinjiang is challenging, and most journalists are now unable to freely report from the province.
Satellite imagery can allow us to look at and to investigate a place that otherwise would be closed off to us. Xinjiang in particular is a very difficult place for journalists to work. They would often be followed and being forced to delete footage. That's largely because it has been the subject of intense crackdowns.
The Uyghurs are the largest ethnic group in the region, which the government sees as a major security risk.
In 2017, Xinjiang's party secretary signalled that what he called Muslim terrorists would be eradicated.
The region was turned into a police state, especially starting in 2017. We had a campaign of mass internment.
Şənbə gündü o. Şu mən балаларымға тамақ етіп, әттегенде тамақны етіп егізітіп, түштен кейін баланы айландыру үшін ойлаған. Тосаттылы бір телефон келді, şu сақчықанаға келді. Шуның білалам жүркім сәп кетті. Чүнки бұрын тұтылғанларның нұрғылары сақчықанаға чақыртылып, қайтып келмеген. Менің үйем şu пәмдір консерва işləydiğən zavodның енді. Мәхбусларын әкеге вақт бәне сақчы машылар аны дейінке оланы кіргізіп, аштақ қылуды. Көзен білі көгенмін. Uyghurlar bulungan haksızlık her zaman battı. Lekin mecburi emgek bu işler avjab ketdi. Bütün Jinguzanda saqchi punktlarni tuyuqsizlam qurishga boshlab ketdi bular. Analik o'z vaqtida sen Facebook tushiribsan, WhatsApp tushiribsan deb bir boshdan tutishga boshladi. Ki urug' tuqqanlaringiz olsun. Hamda ashlarning ko'zlarini atgan, xalt kiygizib apmangan ko'rinishli. Bu pek ichinishli ahvol.
There were these rumours starting to emerge of hundreds of thousands of people being detained in camps and just disappearing. And so we used satellite imagery to investigate what we believe to be the full network of camps. Often big enough to hold tens of thousands of people.
More than 1 million are thought to have been detained in Xinjiang after the 2017 crackdown. That's nearly 1 in 25 of the population.
There was a big leak of photographs from inside one detention centre of mugshots of the detainees as they'd been processed. And I mean, there were thousands of them.
And these leaked drone shots show hundreds of prisoners from one detention centre in western Xinjiang.
And that communicated the sorts of conditions under which detainees were likely to be being kept.
The Uyghur people, Kazakh people who has been disappeared in the Chinese internment camp, the tomato you're eating, it could be picking by the people like them.
Former detainees say they were forced to work in factories and farms attached to the camps.
We could see that in satellite imagery. Factories kind of look the same all over Xinjiang. They're these steel-framed buildings with bright metal roofs.
One detention centre alone in West Xinjiang had 33 factory buildings.
We were able to count about 2 million square metres worth of factory space in the camps across Xinjiang.
It's difficult to know if any are tomato factories, but government documents confirm agricultural businesses have been run from detention centres and prisons. China says the camps were education and training centres where those at risk of extremism were taught new skills. Many former detainees say it's indoctrination.
Forced labor is linked to the internment camps, by which persons detained in the camps undergo a period of intensive, brutal brainwashing, and then afterward they are released into various forms of forced work placements.
In 2017, I was in prison for 1 year and 9 months for something like going to Friday prayers. One day feels like 5. Time moves very slowly when you're depressed. They would make us sing Chinese propaganda songs. They told us they did us a favor by sending us to camps, and we could earn our freedom through labor. That's how they scare us. After I left, they said, "There's a job for you in the tomato plantation." To avoid going back to the camp, I agreed to that. Once I was spraying the tomatoes with pesticide and accidentally poured some on the soil. The guard who was watching us had some in his hands. He said, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Use your eyes!" and sprayed the pesticide into my eyes. They will shout and threaten you for every small mistake. To this day, I still can't look at bright lights.
Xinjiang tomatoes are cheap because the production is connected to the atrocities of forced labor.
China was selling some of the cheapest tomatoes in the world, but became increasingly secretive about who was buying them.
And there's been like this slow shutting down of access to information about China. China no longer releases detailed customs data. It's really challenging to work out where the tomato paste is going.
Hamdulillah, ama chet elga o'tkazganligimizga deydi deb bir kunlik vazifamiz to'shqmasa jazolar bekchi yaqin. Bizda har xil qisqa qoladi uni. O'shani qildirish uchun bizda masalan to'qliq Diyambanga yoqadi. Bu ishtonni soldirib o'tib, kursarlarni qo'yib turib, kasa urdi. Bo'ldim anaqa uyga putimizdan qo'limizga ko'zini selish orqali o't tag'izib qo'ydim. Shu uyning o'zida yenimizga bir chelak qo'yib birdi, tarat qildigan. Kunlik yarim stakkan suv, bir mo'mi.
It's hard to verify Ahmed's claims, but in 2022, the UN reported forced labor and torture in Xinjiang's detention centers, including prolonged solitary confinement and being given electric shocks while strapped to a so-called tiger chair. China said the report was based on disinformation and lies, which wantonly smears and slanders China.
There is a lot of fear. I know we're using the term forced labor, but it doesn't really encapsulate the gravity of the situation. I mean, I don't want people who consume ketchup and tomato paste without understanding this is actually made with Uyghur forced labor. And it's very hard for people to fathom this reality.
Despite the secrecy surrounding exports, one tomato company is so big we suspect they do ship to the West. Xinjiang Guanong. Its factories and blue barrels showcased by a senior executive.
It's absolutely massive, and its adverts show the glory of what they do there, the size of their operation, and the quality of their produce.
But what we were not seeing in Guanong's ads is who is behind the company, which is this shadowy paramilitary organization called the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, the XPCC.
Seen here in training, the paramilitary XPCC operates across Xinjiang as a regional government, controlling law enforcement, thousands of companies, and a fifth of its agriculture. It was sanctioned by the US in 2020 for human rights violations, including forced labor. Its social media portrays workers as happy and enthusiastic.
It's the state inside the state. They have their prison and they have their court system. They control the water resources. They industrialize it, the tomato. They force people to work and sell the cheap products around the world.
This promo from a Korla prison and this police training video show the XPCC's 2nd Division. the one which owns the Xinjiang Guanong Tomato Company.
Xinjiang Guanong is based in the region near Kola. A typical ad is like a sunny day in a tomato field, happy smiling people showing off the fruit. In fact, they're heavily implicated in forced labour in Xinjiang.
As an ex-PCC-owned company, Xinjiang Guanong also faced US sanctions. But in Europe, they take a softer approach. Countries like Germany and the UK allow companies to self-regulate to ensure forced labour isn't used in supply chains.
The UK has the Modern Slavery Act. It requires companies over a certain size to publish a statement every year on the steps they are taking to address modern slavery. But it doesn't actually require them to take any steps.
In 2021, the UK Parliament held an inquiry into whether supermarkets were doing enough.
UK supermarkets were pulled in front of Parliament to give evidence on what they understood about Uyghur forced labour in the supply chains.
Where do you see your members' responsibility and where do you see the government responsibility?
What we've seen has been abhorrent and would be abhorrent to all of our customers as well. So our members, who have all the major high street brands, know that their responsibility to their customers is that they can trust that the products that they're buying aren't produced with forced labour. All of our members have stopped sourcing from Xinjiang.
In written evidence, Tesco, Asda and Sainsbury's told Parliament they'd instructed suppliers to stop sourcing from Xinjiang.
What supermarkets were saying is that they had identified there was this risk of Uyghur forced labour in their tomato supply chain. I mean, supermarkets knew about it.
The question is, after this 2021 parliamentary inquiry where they said they would go and talk to their suppliers, did they actually do it?
今天预定出去的西红柿已经给大家采摘好了，来给大家尝一下新鲜采摘的西红柿味道是怎么样的。
In contrast to Europe, the US introduced strict legislation banning all Xinjiang imports, including tomatoes.
There were these sanctions in place, and yet we know that China continues to produce vast amounts of tomatoes. Where are those tomatoes going?
While China doesn't release detailed customs data, its neighbour, Kazakhstan, does. A hub for goods coming out of Xinjiang. Millions of kilos of tomato paste pass through every year.
In the shipping data, there was one company that was missing from the records, and that company was Guanong. What was happening to their tomatoes? The majority of the shipments coming from China were coming from this one company that nobody had ever heard of, called Baijiu Red Fruit.
Seen from a satellite, the coordinates for Baijiu Red Fruit reveal an office in this building, but no obvious factory. And when we called, it turned out it shares a phone number with Xinjiang Guanong.
Well, it seems that Baijiu Red Fruit was a shell company for Guanong. And Guanong described Baijiu as having been set up to help them with export control challenges.
Companies are changing names, creating shell companies and so on. It's exactly the way that they're going to manage to evade sanctions.
We've spent a year piecing together shipping data from around the world and can establish for the first time exactly where Xinjiang Guanong's tomatoes go.
We discovered that there are special trains which take the tomatoes, and a special train line that has been built from China, passing through Kazakhstan, going across the Caspian Sea through Azerbaijan and into Georgia, where they were handled by a shipping company who sent them onwards to Italy.
One name kept appearing in the shipping data.
We've got photographs of a special train from Xinjiang sending tomatoes to a company called Antonio Petty.
The Blue Barrel's journey ends here in Italy. It's renowned for tomatoes and the home of Antonio Petty, a major tomato processing company.
Nonna, ma non fai la passata quest'anno?
Ma no, tesoro, ormai sono troppo anziana. E poi ci vuole tanto tempo.
Nonna, hai fatto la passata!
Petty, la passata che non t'aspetti.
In Petty's advertising, they showcase themselves as almost 100% Italian. There's a lot of pride expressed in who is farming these tomatoes. They lean into really positive virtues that would encourage people to purchase their products.
Petty is one of the major companies in the tomato industry sector. It is widely exporting its products, I guess, worldwide. It was involved in an investigation some years ago.
In 2021, the Italian military police, they suspected that Petty were using foreign tomatoes and passing them off as Italian. And so they started to carry out this extensive period of surveillance. And then they went and did a raid. We've got these police drone shots flying over their factories where we can see hundreds of blue barrels containing tomato paste in the courtyard.
The Carabinieri seized 3,500 tons of tomato products, labelled as 100% Italian, and another 1,000 from outside the EU. They suspected Petty of fraud, and it was reported that Chinese and other foreign tomatoes were passed off as 100% Italian.
We believe that some of those tomatoes were Chinese. And that they also discovered recipe books which talked about how Chinese and Italian tomatoes should be mixed.
It was a big news because Petty are also supplying the major retailers worldwide. No one would have expected such a conduct from a leading industry.
So the problem with all of that is that if they were importing these Chinese tomatoes and passing them off as Italian, that's fraud.
But a year after the raid, the case was settled out of court. Petty denied the allegations about Chinese tomatoes, and the issue was quietly dropped.
පැмидор her qitim qo'lam chiqqan chog'da to'g'riga vaqtimda shu nahaq tutilib u kelgan siri sho'xildan shundoq nim qilgan nafrat man sho'xildagi gunoh emas. O Xitoylarniki zulm uchun bevosita deb qarayman. Hozir davomlashyapti bizni yoshlarning, o'rta yoshlarning, cho'nglarningki, yashangan ota-onalarimizniki ishlayotganligini, ya'ni kuchli qurolliq besim majburiy ishlayotganligini ularning faqatla g'abi nim qilamatgan, igi chiqamatganligini his qildim. Azoblandim.
There have been extensive reports of forced labour in Xinjiang for decades. But we're unable to get inside the province to establish how widespread it is now. We're relying on footage shot by people already there, and have analysed dozens of videos purporting to show it in action. Many are impossible to verify.
It's really challenging to get footage evidencing forced labour. The censors make sure that this content doesn't stay online for very long. The videos themselves are often quite short and not necessarily clear.
In the videos, you're not seeing people being beaten, you're not seeing like weapons. So what we know about the coercion, we've learned that in other ways. There's a lot of clues that we can use. And we're trying to work out, where did this happen and when did it happen? And what does it show? Some of that is about who has posted it. Sometimes we have an IP address. Sometimes we'll see the registration plate on a car.
In this video, a guard oversees tomato pickers. On his shirt is written Chitai, a major tomato farm under the XPCC near Urumqi. And here, farm workers are overseen by what appear to be private security guards, with a truck number plate indicating it's filmed in a tomato-growing area near Korla.
When you see these operatives in military uniform, it does beg the question, could this be another instance of forced labour?
Despite reports of detention centres closing, the UN warns there are still significant risks of forced labour in Xinjiang.
There are two systems of forced labor. One is linked to the internment camps and to prisons, and the other one is the transfer of Uyghurs to work in factories and fields enforced by officials.
Labour transfer is a scheme where people are moved away from their homes for paid work, often by recruitment teams going door to door. In 2023, China said it transferred 3 million people in Xinjiang. It's part of the poverty alleviation policy used throughout the country. China says this has raised the living standards of nearly 100 million people.
Xi Jinping has been known for his big plans for Xinjiang of poverty alleviation, which actually does exist across the entire country, but there's been specific focus to how it's been used in Xinjiang against local people there.
Eyewitnesses claim many are forced to work for companies like Xinjiang Guanong and the XPCC, including this man, who did business with them until 2016.
Biz yuqori töven her qaysi qatlam shu munosabatlardan foydalanib biz jiq narsalarni ko'rganmiz. Har yili ish qilib bir 3 oy shu ashdan muhitlam o'tidi mening hayotim. Ya'ni ash o'rtamni ash xildagi qulamga ko'rish bilan. Bundan hamma yerda bor. Yani bundan o ya devlet içindeki devlet bundan da mesela işlep çıkarışka gücü yetmese yerlikteki adamlarını toplu köçürüp, apırıp, iş kısalıp, qoğulup eterleydi. Uygurlarning özünün kevezleri etizlikta turup, kışta qayıgıp gitidi. Çuqum aşlap berip, bundan ki pəmidir özünü çıkış gerek. Dixallar bamayımız desa, senin ideyanı mesele varken de milli bölgeci de ekirip solayımız da korktudu. Yerini tatı aldı, ceza koydu. Biz aslan amisini kördük.
The impact of these labor transfer policies is really dramatic. Oftentimes this involves a loss of their land. Many are transferred far away from their home region. It separates husbands from wives, parents from children.
The UN's International Labour Organization warned in 2022 that labour transfer in Xinjiang poses a high risk of coercion, even if people are paid.
The big threat is that if you don't pick the tomatoes, you could be sent to one of the camps. And that's a really significant way of forcing people to take on this labour.
Leaked local government documents from several years ago appear to evidence coercion. Officials in Chapchal County are told that those who do not do well should be punished. In Kashgar, people who can be detained include former prisoners repeatedly refusing employment. Those labelled extremists include people obstructing recruitment teams by causing trouble or even crying. China says allegations that people are forced to work or relocate are politically motivated lies, designed to hurt the people of Xinjiang. They're proud of labour transfer, and the XPCC have showcased its tomato factories on social media.
这是生活可以吗？一个月3000多嘛，3500。工作很满意，工作很轻松。
But state media also admits that the XPCC sometimes use police and prison guards in village recruitment teams. As for Xinjiang Guanong, its 2023 company report confirms it sends the teams to people's homes weekly and sometimes daily.
Xinjiang Guanong is involved in some of the most coercive forced labor schemes that we have seen. They go door to door in villages and they force local Uyghurs to go to work in factories and grow tomatoes.
It's very difficult to assess the nature and true scale of forced labor in Xinjiang, but some academics have made an evaluation based on government documents.
My estimate is that up to 2.5 million ethnic group members in Xinjiang are in forms of forced labor. Several 100,000 are involved against their will in producing tomatoes.
Three years after the police raid on the Italian company Petit, we're investigating whether it's using Chinese tomatoes.
I have a meeting with Pasquale Petit.
To find out, an undercover reporter is posing as a businessman, wanting to place a large order of tomato products.
This is passata, this is organic.
He's been invited to tour Petty's factory in Tuscany.
Go up to this way, passata. Because if you are to our factory, you are looking for quality.
The fictional business is an airline catering firm looking for inexpensive tomato paste.
We are just producing only good or top quality. So,
but all the paste is produced in Italy. Yes?
Depends. No. If you want Italian, we put Italian. But
Okay.
this way it's more expensive.
Yes.
Depends on you.
The cheaper tomatoes?
Yes, we can give you the cheapest price. We will give you two different prices.
Good.
Italian
Origin
and foreign.
and foreign. So what do you put on the labeling? Because this is one of the
We
important
put
things.
on the label EU, not EU, because we can also mix
I know.
the different tomatoes to have a good quality.
Yes, got it. So, so the label will say EU stroke non-EU. We need good, cheap price tomatoes. I don't care from China, Turkey, South America, whichever is the best price.
We buy from Turkey, California, Spain, Portugal, Greece. This is our country.
Yeah, nothing from China. You don't get any cheap ones.
If you want, also from China.
You can get cheap ones there.
Yes, for many countries we have to use Chinese tomatoes because otherwise the Chinese are selling directly there because they are more competitive. But in Europe, no one wants Chinese tomatoes. But if for you it's okay, we will find a way to produce the best price possible, even using Chinese tomatoes.
To Pisa.
Petty admitted on camera that they're using Chinese tomatoes. I mean, all of our research pointed in that direction, but it was amazing to hear them admit it.
Petty later told us they have not bought from Xinjiang Guanong since they were sanctioned by the US for forced labor in 2020. But our camera captured a dozen blue barrels and one labelled Xinjiang Guanong, produced in 2023.
let me know.
Thank you, Pasquale.
And thank you for the visit.
Mille grazie.
And the findings of the undercover filming are confirmed by the shipping data we analysed, along with a non-profit organisation, C4ADS.
Between 2020 and 2023, Guanong sent over 36 million kilos of tomato paste to Petty. It's a huge amount. We know that they continue to buy Chinese tomatoes. We know that they produce goods under their own brand, but they also produce for supermarkets across Europe, who then sell them as their own branded products. But none say made in China, and many strongly imply that they were produced in Italy, that they have Italian flags on it, for example. What we don't know is whether they're selling Chinese tomatoes to supermarkets. And if they are, where are they going?
It's really hard to know if tomato paste sold to consumers at supermarkets worldwide are made with tomatoes from Xinjiang or with tomatoes from companies like Petty. So we're collecting samples from supermarkets across the UK and worldwide to test them and see where they come from.
64 tomato purees will be tested, from top Italian brands to supermarket own brand products in the UK, Germany, and the US. They'll be compared in a lab to samples from China. A world-renowned forensic testing company in Australia will do the analysis.
We're going to investigate the claim of origin that's on the packaging, so whereabouts the tomato in the product has come from. The purpose of our investigation was to test whether or not the origin claim was accurate.
The testing works by examining the tomatoes on an atomic level. Anything that grows in soil absorbs trace elements of chemicals from surrounding water and rocks.
Trace element analysis can give an indication as to where a product has come from. What we use that analysis for is to build a pattern or a fingerprint which are unique to the country of origin. The first objective for us was to establish what the underlying trace element profile would look like for China and a likely profile would look like for Italy. We found that they were very distinct. This is exactly what we would have expected, given that tomatoes are grown on separate continents.
But there was a problem. We couldn't tell which supermarket branded purees were made by Petty.
Then Source Certain pointed out this really interesting thing, which is that if you look at the label, there's often a code written underneath that. And in many cases, that code starts with the letters APE. And it just turns out that that's the code that Petty uses to mark some of its products. That was a real breakthrough moment. So we went from a position where it really wasn't clear where they were coming from to a point where we knew immediately whether they came from Petty or not. When we got the results back from the lab, some of the tomatoes seemed to be all Italian, as they claimed on the label.
These included some British and German supermarket own brands, top Italian brands, and everything from the US. But it wasn't the case for many Petty products.
For months we had been investigating Petty. But it was so shocking to get the results back from that testing. Some of the tomato paste was very likely Chinese tomatoes, which is something that we strongly suspected, but to have it confirmed was incredible.
4 Petty-made products that don't claim an origin appear to be Chinese. 2 sold in the UK by Tesco and Morrisons. 2 in German supermarkets, Lidl and Edeka. But other Petty-made products give the impression they're Italian. Tesco's Italian tomato puree has an Italian flag on the outside, but appears to be Chinese on the inside. It's the same story with Waitrose Essential Tomato Puree. And this is legal, because supermarkets don't have to specify where the tomatoes themselves come from. But the legality of others is in question.
We also found a number of products where there was clear claims on the packaging that it was Italian tomatoes, where we were only able to associate the tomato paste with that of a Chinese source or origin.
Watch the budget, please.
Asda, who cheerfully advertised low prices.
Sorry, love. Had to shop around a bit to find dinner for under £5.
Why didn't you just go to Asda?
I went around the houses trying to find decent prices.
Both its organic and own-label tomato purees say they're made with Italian-grown tomatoes, but the testing shows they're most likely Chinese. And these products from German supermarkets, Penny and Riva, also appear to contain Chinese tomatoes, despite claiming they're Italian.
Wow. Do you mean that Chinese tomatoes are labeled as Italian tomatoes? Wow. Yeah. That is a big news to me. If those latter products contain tomato of a different origin, that is a food fraud.
All the supermarkets and manufacturers we've investigated dispute our findings. Some said their test results contradict ours. But we found 17 products appearing to contain Chinese tomatoes.
Like, these Chinese tomatoes seem to be everywhere. These are, the biggest supermarkets in the UK and the biggest supermarkets in Europe. Even though the tomatoes that we tested have a profile consistent with Chinese tomatoes, and doesn't say Xinjiang. Because Petty is buying directly from the companies in Xinjiang, we can be fairly confident that some of these tomatoes are made with forced labour.
The results come 3 years after Petty was raided, and Asda and Tesco told the UK Parliament that they would stop sourcing from the region.
I think I've got this at home. Like, these are products that everyone has at home.
So you're telling me I have been eating the Uyghur forced labor tomato at home, the tomato paste at home. Great, this is really great. Am I surprised? No. Am I angry now? Yes.
People should know that when we are having these products, we are consuming the blood of my people.
At Waitrose, we never stop asking questions about the food you eat, starting at the source.
Waitrose, they try and sell themselves as like an ethical company. So for a British consumer, it's going to be potentially particularly shocking that Waitrose is implicated.
Can our value range also have good values? Well, he seems to think so.
I think consumers have been left in the dark here about what exactly it is they're buying.
When we ask more questions, we get to better answers. Waitrose, food to feel good about.
I've had phone calls with supermarkets in 2020 about this, in 2021, about tomatoes and many other products as well. So if there's any company now, any supermarket now in 2024 claiming they didn't know, that is an absolute farce. They should know, and they did know.
The nature of the culpability of the supermarkets is something that we need to answer. Like, are they being hypocritical? Is it negligence and incompetence? Are they being misled? Are they misleading us?
Forced labor is built on family separation, mass detention, We need a law. We have to make the company to understand that if they continue complicit on the Uyghur forced labor, they will face some severe legal consequences.
Anti-slavery campaigners say that enacting strict sanctions, like the US, and ending self-regulation is key.
The EU has now committed to introduce stronger laws. Once those laws are in force, there's a country that is very clearly going to be the dumping ground, and that's the UK. The UK Modern Slavery Act is utterly not fit for purpose.
There is a wider problem, that is the true cost of food. When we see low price, we have to question ourselves, what is behind that? What is the true cost of this product? Who is paying for that?
Hammamiz bir inson, hammamizning yashash huquqi bor. Biz shu yotgan narslarimizga bir diqqat qilib, nereden kim orqali kelyotganligiga bir diqqat qilsak, bizningki mecburi emgak bilan, kuch qon terimiz bilan tiyilib.
Mamujan now lives in exile with his wife and daughter. He says his brother died after being in detention, and he can't contact the rest of his family.
Kızım özü soraydı. Dada bizden mening cho'ng onam yo'qmi? Ya mening cho'ng dadam yo'qmi? Bizden qarindoshlarım yo'qmi? Nimishqa biz o'rniga ziyorat ketmaymiz? Ham nerede yaşatamdan bilmayman.
Mening ikkinim bordi, birisini o'tirib etdi.
Ben inim için neyim talep kılışımda üzerime bilmeyemem. Fakat inimle bir arzusuna...
İlican kırınışımdan bir arzusu vardı. Fransa'nın Eiffel Tömür Mınarı'nın üstüne çıkıp baksam dedi.
Peki hiç bana ben bir derbasından bir üç resim çizsem, hiç bana Roy Boston bir köse şunu. Şunun kabri bir şey der bana, sen bana maya ben vardım. Desem, bu mevcut yeterli düşünüme, inim için.
Men shularninki, men shular qilamg'ach, men qiysam. Men Fransiyaning Tömür Eiffel Mınarı'na chiqsam. Mening arzuyim yo'q, boshqa arzuyim yo'q.